Well, everyone, it's the end of the year, and I have been asked by you guys over on my streams to share my Game of the Year picks with you. I have put a lot of thought into it. I've gone back and forth, actually. I thought I had it locked in 1000% for sure earlier this year, and the last few months have actually caused me to reflect and question. So I've gone back and forth, but in this video, I'm going to share with you my pick for Game of the Year, and I will try to explain it as best I can. If you want to hear me explain what I think are the worst games of the year, I also did that video over on my second channel, Luke Stevens Live, and I recommend you go check it out because we talk about all those games you probably expect, and I explain why they were so terrible and what I hope the industry learns from them. So go check that out. Links below. Spoiler alert, I give out the award that I called the Concord Award. It's kind of like the Darwin Award, but for video games. So if you want to go see that, links below. But before we get to all of that, a big thank you to our sponsor, Techland, and their game, Dying Light 2. Dying Light 2 Stay Human takes place roughly 20 years after the first game, and it's an open world zombie game where movement is key with a parkour system, a paraglider, grappling hooks, and much more. And I actually reviewed Dying Light 2 back when it first launched, but since then they have added over 10 quality of life updates that totally overhaul the entire game. They've reworked the audio so you can hear exactly where zombies are coming from. They've enhanced the behaviors of infected during nighttime to make them more unexpected and random. They've reworked the game's chases running away from zombies so that they're much less arcadey and more unpredictable and realistic. And they've added other things like finishers, transmogs, survivor missions. And when paired with the Winter Tales event and the update that shortened the prologue of the game, it's made it a perfect time to get into it for the first time, with the game being 60% off on Steam. So check it out at the link in the description box below to get the game for 60% off. First things first, I want to say that this year has actually been pretty solid when it comes to games, but there haven't been the same blowout smash hits that there's been in other years, like even 2023. You know, like in 2023, we had games like Baldur's Gate 3 or Tears of the Kingdom, which were so freaking good that everybody kind of agreed, yep, they're basically masterpieces. You know, you couldn't even really poke holes in them other than like the occasional frame drops or for Baldur's Gate 3, Act 3 bugs when it first launched. But on the whole, they were phenomenal, like games of the generation that redefine what those types of games are. And this year we've had some good games, or even really good games, but nothing in my opinion that really gets to that level. This year on the whole seems to be much more about surprises that come out of nowhere and refinements. Games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth are fantastic refinements of the games that came before them. Or same thing with Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, a fantastic DLC that was of course nominated for Game of the Year despite being a DLC and not actually a game from the year, but that's a separate issue. These were certainly phenomenal, but they were refinements of what came before them. Shadow of the Erdtree, a refinement of Elden Ring, and Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, a refinement of the remake that came before it. So you know, they're solid. Even Metaphor ReFantazio, which I'm going to talk more about in a little bit, that game also fantastic, but it's very much a refinement of the systems built for like Persona 5 Royale. And that's a good thing, but it's not the same like big tsunami wave of innovation or breathtaking amazement that we get with something like Baldur's Gate 3, which is just so far beyond anything that's come before it. But I want to be clear that that does not mean that this year was bad for gaming. Yes, we had some very recognizable and big ticket flops, but we also had a lot of solid games as well. For me, Game of the Year pretty much comes down to a handful of candidates. I think something like Black Myth Wukong deserves a nomination for reasons I'll get to in a second. I think games like Helldivers 2 also deserve a nomination just for blowing everybody away and dominating the public discourse for a solid month and a half, which is remarkable. Other games like Pal World also did it, but I think Helldivers, at least in my circles and for me and the type of player I am, really made that splash. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is also fantastic. Astro Bot is also very, very good. Another example of a refinement rather than a revolution. And while there's other games that I liked to varying degrees, such as Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth or Silent Hill 2 Remake, I am not gonna put these into my finalist list for a couple of reasons. Chiefly because Silent Hill 2 is a remake, and I just feel weird about giving remakes Game of the Year. Personally, like, at least Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is much more than just a one-to-one remake. I mean, there's a lot more going on there than just a remake. Of course, they split it into 3 parts, then this is the second part of it. So it's not even really a remake anymore. Not to mention they're redoing parts of the story. No spoilers, but you know, if you know. But on the flip side, if we look at something like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, it's a solid game. Again, another refinement of the formula, but to me, it just didn't have the same wow factor as a couple of these other games. So while there's a lot of very valid nominees, I think for me, it pretty much comes down to Metaphor ReFantazio, Astro Bot, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Black Myth Wukong, and Helldivers 2. Elephant in the room is Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, and as I kind of hinted at just before this, in my view, Game of the Year needs to go to a game that released in that year, and as a result, I just don't think Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree qualifies, as also Phantom Liberty last year didn't qualify for Game of the Year, and I don't think it should. I think if you're an expansion for a game, that's awesome. I think there should be a dedicated category for that, because expansions are a different beast entirely. And some people could say, well, Shadow of the Erdtree is awesome enough that it could have been its own game. And I would say cool, but it wasn't. Like, it requires you to defeat Moog and a couple of other bosses and get pretty far into this other game you have to buy. And so it's just not its own game. And while it's fantastic, I just personally don't think it checks the boxes it needs to be nominated for Game of the Year. Petty, sure, but that's just where I'm putting it, because if we don't have standards, what do we have? To go through each of these individually, I will work in reverse. Helldivers 2 is fantastic. I did not expect to find this game compelling or interesting really at all. I remember saying back in 2023 when they first showed some trailers for this that it looked like a game a lot of people would like, but it was not going to be for me. And then I played it and it wowed me. And I'm sure a lot of other people who didn't see this coming. The production value was great. The graphics were stunning. The gameplay was rewarding and satisfying. And they really did dominate gaming discourse for a solid month and a half, 2 months. Like, it was all anybody was talking about. It's all any of my friends wanted to play. It was huge. And what made it all the more exciting was that it was something nobody saw coming. This wasn't like a Marvel Rivals situation where people saw it coming. They expected it to be pretty good. They played a beta. They're like, oh, it's really good. And then they played it when it launched. Like, it's not like that. This came out, was a splash like nothing else, and it took over the industry when it launched. And I think that that's pretty remarkable, especially considering it was not assumed to be that successful, even by Sony. I mean, Sony has been pretty honest that this was a surprise to them. I don't think that they expected this to pop off at all. I think they were pretty stunned. Speaking of being stunned, Black Myth Wukong actually ended up delivering on a lot of the promises that were made in the marketing cycle and in those gameplay trailers that they released over the last few years. The boss fights were epic, the graphics were stunning, and the game was significantly larger than I think a lot of people expected it to be. However, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. The game relied very heavily on upscalers to hit frame rate targets on console, and as a result on PlayStation 5 it just doesn't look particularly great in my opinion. And after testing it on stream and in videos and stuff, I think it's gotten better certainly, but it's not great. And beyond that, the connective tissue between the boss fights, which are certainly the game's standout feature, leaves a lot to be desired. Environments are pretty shallow. There are not many interesting things to find. And while once again, they have enhanced things after launch, such as notably adding an in-game map to help you navigate the complex winding roads in the game. But what I almost find even more remarkable about Black Myth Wukong is that they were fighting American games journalism like tooth and nail for the entire last year or so of the production of this game, where IGN was writing multiple hit pieces on the studio, even accusing them of being sexist, in part because the logo of the studio, which you can see here on screen now, they said it looked like a sperm, and therefore the studio is sexist and the game should be canceled. Like, I'm not joking. That's literally one of the pieces of evidence that was brought up in the IGN hit piece article. It's stunning, but for whatever reason, games media was dedicated, especially IGN, to bashing this game every chance they got. And the fact that they still hit over 2 million concurrent players at launch, sold 20 million copies like it was nothing, I think that alone is pretty remarkable. And I think they deserve a lot of credit for overcoming that insane hurdle. The next nominee is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And what can I say about this game that hasn't already been said? It is very well done. It is extremely beautiful. The combat is super tight. The writing is very solid. And across the board, it's just really good. It's one of those games that you can't really pick many holes into. Some people will just be like, I kind of lost interest, or I fell off after 20 hours or so. And that's fine. You know, that happens with all sorts of games. But on the whole, it's just a really well-made thing. Like, it's just a solid product at the end of the day. I, for one, find it really interesting how they've chosen to go about this, but I do also find it frustrating how they've broken up this story into these 3 different parts and chunks. So now, as somebody that didn't play the original, because I was like, I don't think I was alive yet. Hold on, when did it launch? Yeah, I wasn't even born yet. It launched January 31st of 1997. I was born June of 1997. So I didn't play the first like version of this, certainly not at launch. And so I'm going into all of this raw, giggity, and having watched like some story recap videos and stuff on YouTube. But beyond that, I'm not overly familiar with it. And as a result, like, I'm enjoying it, but I'm frustrated also that I have to wait another couple years or few years before I get to see the conclusion of the story. And I think a lot of other players are in a similar spot where they might be waiting to get that part 3 before they play through all of them all at once, which I couldn't really blame anybody for wanting to just wait to blast through it all at the same time. So it'll be interesting to see how the final piece of this puzzle clicks into place and how it all ties together. I'm excited to see that. But Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, can't say much about it other than it's really, really good and one of the best games of the year, like without a doubt. Our 4th nominee is Astro Bot. This also is just a really solid game. There's not a lot of holes to poke in it. It's just fantastically well made. It's very well optimized. It's fun. It's silly. It's lighthearted. And I think it reminds us all of the importance of gaming and what gaming should be like and should be about, which is having fun. I think releasing in the shadow of Concord is also what made the game seem all the more bizarre, because both those games were greenlit by the same executives, like the same guys that thought Concord was going to be a Star Wars level success, greenlit Astro Bot. And that game ends up exploding and being really, really popular and winning eventually Game of the Year at the Game Awards. And I find it really funny. I would love to know what was going on inside those corporate offices when Astro Bot popped off the way that it did, because I would wager that they really thought Concord was going to be the money-making cash cow of the year and that Astro Bot would be a fun little love letter to fans. But instead, it's kind of flipped, except Concord wasn't anything and it's dead. So not really flipped. It's just this one died and then this one did well. It's a different thing. But once again, Astro Bot is another example of these refinements. It's not a reinvention of Astro's Playroom that came installed by default on the PlayStation 5. It's a refinement of all of that. It's just that, but stretched into a whole game. And that's awesome. You know, that's what a lot of people wanted the Playroom to be. They were looking for that. But it also is not the same level of leap or excitement or scale or anything that you might have gotten in years past. So I can understand why some people are like, Astro Bot's really good, but it's just not that phenomenon that I was hoping to see. And then my 5th and final nominee is Metaphor ReFantazio. Transparently, this is one of those games that I will not fault people if it's not their cup of tea. This is a very niche game, I think is probably fair to say. Made by Atlas, it is a narrative RPG game with turn-based combat, similar in vein and style to the Persona games. And they truly do take all of the lessons they learned from the Persona games and just refine it and fix a lot of those small frustrations that you might have seen in Persona. It's not all perfect. There's definitely some growing pains. For example, this game is built on the same engine that was used for Persona 5, and that engine was also used for the original version of Persona 5 that launched on the PlayStation 3, which people might not remember, but the original launch of Persona 5 was on the PlayStation 3. As you can see, they launched on September 15th of 2016 on the PS3 and PS4 in Japan on September 15th, and then worldwide in April of 2017 on the PS4 and everything, which again, it's crazy to think of that, because when I think of Persona 5, I think of like PS4 and I think of 2017. I don't think of the PS3 even being part of the conversation or whatever. But as a result of that being built in the same tool set, it means that they were able to pump out Metaphor ReFantazio relatively quickly compared to a typical game development cycle for something this big, but it also means environments are really, really small. The graphics are PS3 grade, and the art direction carries a lot of the weight here and makes up for that. But once again, it's one of those games I would not blame anybody if they're like, doesn't look like my cup of tea. It definitely is going to be polarizing like that. But that's the age-old story with these types of games. It's not about the graphics. It's not about the fidelity. It's not about the resolution or the texture quality. What makes games like Metaphor so fantastic is the music, is the writing, is the turn-based combat, the depth of the builds that you can make, and just how vast and expansive these games really are. They are not for everybody, but if they are for you, you are going to devour these games. And also, being a player that loves his ROG Ally / Steam Deck, just portable PC gaming in general, this is a game made for those platforms. Just being able to pick it up, play it for 30 minutes before bed is a dream come true, and really makes it easier to get in and work through a game of this size, because it's a lot. But those are my nominees: Astro Bot, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Black Myth Wukong, Helldivers 2, and Metaphor ReFantazio. I love all of these. I could give it to any one of them and I'd be like, yeah, no, that's about right. I just think they all are deserving. So for me, the tiebreaker basically just goes to which game I personally felt was just more artistically and emotionally maybe impactful, which game I am just in love with and that I'm going to think about for a long time. And that just frankly is Metaphor ReFantazio. So ding, 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 Metaphor ReFantazio is going to be my game of the year 2024. Again, it's not for everybody, but damn it, it's for me. And while I love Helldivers, Black Myth Wukong, Final Fantasy, Astro Bot, they're all fantastic. And they're all like refinements of formulas that we've seen before. But for me personally, Metaphor is just so freaking fantastic in so many ways. I'm going to be thinking about this game for years and years. And I mean, I put off finishing it until Christmas. Like, it was Christmas night. We were staying over somewhere and I pulled the thing out, and I had been waiting to finish the game because I didn't want it to be over. And I just said, screw it. And I finished it because I needed to wrap it up, and I'm both glad I did and sad I did, because now it's over. But I can't recommend it enough. If you are interested in a vast and very compelling narrative, beautiful art, and some fantastic music, I recommend you check it out. But any of these nominees I could easily recommend to you. They're all very, very good. Let me know what's gonna get your game of the year. Is it on my list or is it something else? Let me know. But that's going to do it for me. Thank you for watching. Again, check out Dying Light 2, 60% off on Steam. Can't be mad at that, right? If you're looking for a game to play over New Year's, check it out. Easy win. But with that, thank you for watching. I love you all desperately, and I'll see you in the next video. Hugs and kisses. Bye-bye.